Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to the live stream today, Loop Live, where we're going to talk about how to sync Ableton Live and ProPresenter wirelessly over a network, and so that your lyrics in ProPresenter are in time with your tracks in Ableton Live. We're going to be going over that and how to set it up. We're going to get started in about 5 minutes. So what I want you to do is click the share button on this video, and what we're going to do is we're going to choose 5 people who will win 20 credits that they can use at Loop Community to buy tracks or whatever it is you want. So hit the share button to be entered to win, and we'll see you in about 5 minutes. Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to Loop Live. My name is Matt McCoy. I'm the founder of loopcommunity.com. I'm also an Ableton Live certified trainer. And I love teaching worship leaders how to use technology to enhance Sunday morning and the worship experience. And there's so much you can do with technology now that when I first started using Ableton Live, it was in 2001 and I was using Ableton Live version 2. And to think about how far it's come since then is mind-boggling. You can do so much now with tracks and Ableton Live. And today, one of the things we're going to talk about is something that we get questions about a lot, and it is how do you sync ProPresenter, running your lyrics on the screen, how do you sync your lyrics with Ableton Live? Because here's what's really cool about this is that, now there's no more need for like the ProPresenter or a PowerPoint person to be like falling asleep in the back, and late lyrics. But now you can actually, if you have a track that's lined up with clicking cues, every time your tracks say, get to the verse, why not just have the ProPresenter automate that and put up the verse lyrics? And you can do that with what I'm going to show you today. You can also automate things like lighting, and we're not going to go into lighting today, but we might do that in a future webinar. So there's a ton you can do, and so what we're going to do is we're going to just dive right in, and I'm going to show you exactly how to automate Ableton Live and ProPresenter to make your life way easier. So I've got two computers here. This computer over here is running Ableton Live. Now here's the thing, you can do this with Ableton Live, any version you've got, whether it's intro, standard, suite. I'm running Ableton Live 9 suite. You'll be able to do it with any of those versions. And then on this computer, I'm running ProPresenter, and this is where all of my lyrics are for my songs. So I've got a 2-song set here. This probably looks very familiar to you. So I've got my first song is Living Hope, and I have my slides set up in the order that the song is. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to go to Ableton Live, and we're going to look at the track I have. I have Living Hope here. Let me just go and press play.
Intro 2.
All right, so I have my
3,
Living Hope
4.
tracks. I'm running in arrangement view. Now, what I'm going to show you how to do it in arrangement view, but you can use the same principles and do the same thing in session view.
2, 3,
it really works
4.
about the same way, except for that we'll get there later, but it works very, very similar. Today I'm going to show you arrangement view just because it's a little easier to see the full arrangement of the song and setting up the lyric cues. So this is our track that we're going to set up lyric cues for. I brought in the track. What I've also done already, just to save time, you're going to want to do this in your worship set, is you're going to want to add these locators to show you where in the song you are. So I've already added the locators. Now you'll notice though I added the main locators like verse, chorus, interlude, but I also added sub-locators that kind of just show me where my different lyric changes would be in the song. So this is like the first 2 lines of the verse, and then this is the second 2 lines of the verse, and then the third 2 lines of the verse, because these are like, picture these as slides, right? So you set up your locators, it's going to help you later just to visually, really quickly put in your ProPresenter cues. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we're going to use something called the IAC driver. And the IAC driver is what's going to let us send MIDI information from here over a network to the ProPresenter computer. And your Mac has the IAC driver on it, all right? And I'm going to show you how to configure that and set it up. The very first thing you want to do before you do any of this is make sure that your computers are on the same network. It could be a Wi-Fi network or it could be a wired Ethernet connection. Doesn't matter what kind of network, as long as the computers are on the same network. That's very important, otherwise this will not work. One thing you might want to think about is putting them on a private network that people in your church can't access, because the last thing you want to have happen is during worship, someone on their phone connects to the network and just starts somehow triggering ProPresenter slides when they shouldn't be. So it might be good to just create a private network that your ProPresenter and Ableton Live computer are using on their own. And that way too, you're kind of saving all the bandwidth to use just for these two computers. So that would be my recommendation. So here's what we're going to do. Let's just go to the Ableton Live computer. We're going to set it up here first. So you go to the Ableton Live computer. What you're going to do is go to Audio MIDI Setup. You can get there by just typing Command-Shift and search Audio MIDI Setup. And this will open up the Audio MIDI settings for your computer. You'll notice here it says IAC driver. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on that. We're going to enable the IAC driver on this computer. So I'm going to click on Devices Online to turn it on. The next thing you need to do is you need to add a port. So I'm going to click the plus sign. It says IAC Bus 1. Okay, so the Devices Online, IAC Bus 1 has been added. Let's click Apply. Okay, it's going to turn this on. Now here's one thing I just want to say before we even continue. There's a lot of things in this whole setup that could go wrong. There's a lot of like little things you have to turn on and enable. So don't stress out if the first time you try this it doesn't work. It's just going to take trial and error. Play with it. You know, when I first started learning how to do this, it probably took me 4 or 5 hours to figure out how to configure it all together. And you just got to play with it. But it's really good to know, like, study this video and study these steps, maybe even write them down. That way, when something does go wrong, you can go back and you know how to troubleshoot it quickly. So let's go back. Okay, so we just enabled the IAC driver. All right. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go back to Ableton Live. And now that it's enabled, if I go to Live Preferences, if I go to the MIDI section, you'll notice that the IAC driver, Bus 1, shows up right down here. There's an input and an output. Now we're going to be focusing on the output because what we're wanting to do is we're going to send MIDI from Ableton Live out the IAC driver. So we're going to be using the output option. So make sure that under output on IAC, turn on track because that means we're going to be sending MIDI notes. All right? So make sure you turn that on. Okay. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a MIDI track. You can do this by just going to Create, Insert MIDI Track. And I'm going to drag this up to the top. And we're just going to call this, I'm going to right-click, rename, do Command-R if you want. I'm going to call this ProPresenter Cues. Okay. And this is a MIDI track where I'm going to be sending all of my ProPresenter cues out of. Now, this is a step that's very important. You want to make sure on the output of this MIDI track that you choose the IAC driver, IAC Bus 1. Because we're saying any MIDI signals that get sent out of this track, send it out of IAC driver Bus 1. We're going to come back to this as far as adding in the individual MIDI cues in a second. The next thing we want to make sure we do is we want to set up a network connection between these two computers. So we need to somehow say, okay, when we send a MIDI cue here, send it over the wireless network all the way to this computer. And what we need to do is we're going to do that inside of Audio MIDI Setup back on this computer. So let's go back to Audio MIDI Setup. Okay. And in this window, there's a little globe here. And you can click this, and it opens up the network settings for the MIDI Studio. Here's what we need to do. I'm going to enable session 1 to go and start a session here. What I like to do is make sure you change the name. Your Bonjour name here will probably by default be your whatever you currently call your computer. So mine said Matt's MacBook Pro. I would change this to say the Ableton Live. That way you know what computer we're talking about. So this is the Ableton Live computer. Okay. Next thing I'm going to do is enable the session 1, Ableton Live. Down here where it says who may connect to me, I'm going to choose anyone. And then under live routings, this is where we're going to say where are we sending the MIDI. So we're going to say the IAC driver, bus 1, goes to network session 1. So my MIDI cues right here, which are going to be going down this track, we're going to add those in a minute. Those are going to send out of the IAC driver bus 1, and it's going to go over the network into network session 1. All right? So, session has been enabled. We changed our bonjour name, enable it, and we did the live routings down here in the bottom right corner, and we made this to say connect, anybody can connect to me. All right, so now let's go ahead and close that out. And we should now be able to go back to the ProPresenter computer, and we need to make some changes over here. We're not out of the weeds yet. So this computer is set up. Now let's go over here to the ProPresenter computer and configure this. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the exact same thing, make sure we're on the same internet connection. And now I'm on the ProPresenter computer. I'm going to go to Audio MIDI Setup. And what's cool is that you don't need to even mess with the ISE driver on this computer. The ISE driver was just for the Ableton Live computer. On this computer, I'm going to click the little globe icon to open up the network setup. And the same thing, I'm going to enable session 1. The thing also I would do is make sure you name your computer. So this one by default was, I don't even know what it was. It was like a default MacBook Pro name, but I changed that name to be ProPresenter. So that's ProPresenter, and you enable this. Sometimes this by default would not be enabled. Under who may connect to me, we're going to choose anyone. And the live routings, you don't have to worry about that. That was only for the Ableton Live computer, because we were talking about how does the MIDI get onto the network. So all you'll see now, you should see, if you're on the same network, you should see right here in the directory, you should see your Ableton Live computer, whatever you named it. So Ableton Live is showing up here in the directory because we're on the same network. And I'm going to choose Connect. Now you see that it connected there. It shows right here, we're in session 1. I'm on this computer called ProPresenter, and participants in this session are Ableton Live. That's the Ableton Live computer over here. Great. So now the two computers are connected to each other. One way to just confirm that MIDI is actually leaving the Ableton Live computer and going to the ProPresenter computer is to create a MIDI clip. So I'm just going to highlight here on the Ableton Live computer and go to Insert MIDI Clip. And if you just enable the little headphone option right here, actually you don't even need to do that. Just click on the piano roll, and you'll notice that when I click on the piano roll, you can see that a MIDI note is being sent on that track. See the little lights go up and down? So that's good. And it's going out the ISE driver over the network. And to confirm that this computer is actually seeing it, when I press something on that piano roll, you should see, and maybe we can go full screen on the ProPresenter computer, you should see right here in this black rectangle box here, when I click, you should see a red line show up. There it is. That shows that it's receiving a MIDI note. It's receiving some sort of signal. If you're seeing that, then you know that you've actually configured, you've set up both computers perfectly. This one's sending MIDI over a network, and this one is receiving that MIDI note. So I always like to try to just test that just to make sure that you've gotten everything set up correctly that far. Okay, so the two computers are connected. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just close out the MIDI session here. You probably could even leave that open. You don't even need to. You don't even have to close it. But you still do stay connected until you click disconnect. So it doesn't really matter. You can leave that open. It's fine. So now we're in ProPresenter. I've got my slides. Now the question is, well, what MIDI notes do you send to actually advance different slides in here? And this is where the ProPresenter MIDI module comes in. So to enable this, you just go to ProPresenter Preferences, and you go to Modules, right corner. And if you scroll down at the bottom, there's one called MIDI, which says allows ProPresenter to interface with external MIDI devices. Now you can buy it. I believe it's $99, or you can just demo it and try it. So today I'm just going to demo it. So when you are in demo mode, it just puts a watermark over the top of your lyrics. But that's fine. It might be good just to like test this out and try it like that. And then you can buy the module if you need to. Once you have the module, just go ahead and click on the Communications tab, and it says no devices added. Okay, here's what we're going to do. First thing we're going to do is going to click on MIDI Setup, and it's going to bring up a window that is pretty cool. So this shows you all the different commands inside of ProPresenter and what MIDI note corresponds to those commands. So the clear all command is C2, or the slide command is C#2, or play and pause is G2. So it shows you all the different commands and what they go for. Now the only thing you really need to know is you can autofill these quickly by by default it comes in as 0. If you need to update that, just choose 0 and click autofill, and it's going to autofill all these commands to what they need to be. But you can customize them if you need to. So let's click OK to close that. And now what we need to do is connect the MIDI device, which is going to be our computer. All right. All you do is click on Add Device and go to MIDI. And you don't need to change the name. Make sure it says Core MIDI device. But Sources is asking you, where is the MIDI information coming from? Now remember, we set up under Audio MIDI Setup Session 1, right? Because that's where we're sending MIDI information. Well, back in ProPresenter, you'll notice that Sources Session 1 is an option. If you don't see Session 1 here, then you probably missed a step previously. So you should see Session 1 here. Let's go and click that and hit Save. And then all you have to do is press Connect. And now ProPresenter is now connected or listening to Session 1. And any MIDI commands it hears over Session 1, it will now control ProPresenter in that way. So let's go ahead and close out ProPresenter Preferences. Got my songs. Now let's go back to Ableton Live, and we're going to go ahead and start adding commands. Now, one thing that we need to do is we're going to go ahead and create, let's just say we're in the intro. And this part really comes down to preference. It comes down to preference of how do you like to run your slides. Do you like to just set up your ProPresenter slides in order as they go? Or do you want to jump around to slides? Like, do you want to go from slide 2 to slide 5 to slide 8 back to slide 5? It's really up to you. But I'll show you a couple of different ways you can do this. One way we could do is just next slide. We're going to say just go to the next slide. So let's go ahead and add a MIDI clip. And you can draw in this MIDI clip using Command B to bring in the pencil tool. And I just drew in a little MIDI note that's going to launch. All right, it's going to play that MIDI note that I just sent. Now let's go ahead and press play. Now one thing you want to do is you want to make sure that it's the right MIDI note. So let's go back to ProPresenter real quick. I should have just done this when I was over here before. We'll go to Communications, MIDI Setup, and look to see what is the next slide. Next slide is C1, right here. You see that? So Presentation Actions. Next slide is C1. So let's go and just try this out. All right, I'm going to go back to Ableton Live. Let's find C1 on the piano roll and put a command there.
Or.
Now, one thing I have noticed is that sometimes these notes are a little off. Maybe it was this one, the lower one. Yeah, that was my bad. It's C minus 1, all right? So I just drew in C minus 1 as the MIDI note, which was the next slide command in ProPresenter, and let's press play. You'll notice that every time it hits that MIDI note, it is advancing my slides in ProPresenter. So let me just go and pull that up again. And actually, let's go back to the beginning of Living Hope. Just make sure you're on the beginning slide. And I'm going to now just copy and paste this command down the timeline to where I want it to go to the next slide. I like it to go just a little bit before the lyrics start singing. So it'll be like this, right before the verse 2. So let's go ahead and press play. We're on the beginning slide, and as we play through the track now, we should see the slides change.
2, 3, 4.
That was actually the intro. My bad. We don't want that. We don't want the slide to change for the intro. So let me just get rid of that one.
Intro.
Here we
2,
go.
3, 4.
So you kind of just have to play around with it. Make sure that the slides are lined up as you want them. Here we go.
Verse. 2, 3, 4.
So it triggered my next slide. And then here comes the next part of the verse. Next slide. And let's put another one real quick. So I'm actually doing this live as it's going. So that might be a fun way to actually do it, is as you play through the track, kind of just put the next slide where you think that the next slide should actually advance. That way the lyrics are up, you know, way before people actually are starting to sing that section.
Chorus. 2, 3, 4.
Cool, so you get the idea, right? You can actually just advance to the next slide. Now one thing you can do is you could actually just save these MIDI clips. So I could, you know, right click on this clip and just rename it and call it, this is my next slide clip. I always use this MIDI note for next slide. And then you can actually just save that in your library. So go to your user library and right click and say, you know, my ProPresenter cues. And you can just click and drag that clip into this folder. And now forever you will have a MIDI clip for next slide that you can just drag into any song that you need to, that will that you can use to set these lyric cues. So that makes it really simple to just quickly, you don't have to like redraw on these MIDI notes every single time you're setting up lyrics for your songs. Okay, so let's go and talk about maybe how you want to, maybe there's other ways you want to do it. Maybe instead of going next slide, next slide, next slide, you want to like jump to a different slide. Well, you can also do that. So let's go back to the Ableton Live computer. I'm just going to highlight all these clips that I just added in there and hit delete. We'll just start over. Okay. And we're going to do, instead what we're going to do is I'm going to, I actually already have some preset clips, kind of like I just showed you how you can save clips. I already have some preset clips. First thing I like to do is do a clear all command at the beginning, but that's just how we run things at our church. So I'm going to do a clear all command at the beginning to make sure we're at the beginning. All right.
Intro.
And then I'm going to go ahead and I have other ones that are for the slide number. All right. So here's ones that actually are for the slide number. And again, you can set these up in the ProPresenter MIDI setup settings. So let's just say I want to go to slide 2 here. I can just put that there. Actually, I'm not going to do that there because that's the intro. So slide 2 is going to be here. All right, and let's just say I want to go to slide 3 here, and then slide 4 here. You can see how these saved clips can save you a lot of time because you're not having to re-type those in. So now I can go ahead and press play.
Intro. 2, 3, 4.
And it's going to jump to the slide number that we're on. Just to show you, I'll actually start on slide 6.
2, 3, 4.
Just to show you that it can jump from a slide to a different slide. So we went from 6 to slide 2. And now it's going to go to slide 3. Cool. There's tons of different commands you can do. You can do like commands for playing video. You can do commands for setting, playing your church countdown timer. You can do commands for playing audio files in ProPresenter. Whatever it is that you're doing in ProPresenter, you can pretty much command it from Ableton Live directly using the IAC driver. Okay, so here's what I would do. If I were doing a couple songs in this set list on the Ableton Live computer, if you're using arrangement view, and again, this just comes down to preference. Like, do you like using arrangement view or session view? It all comes down to preference. But you can do the same thing in both views. It works the same way. In arrangement view, what I would do is I have my first song here. This is Living Hope. And what I would do is then set up my second song. Down the timeline to the right would be This Is Amazing Grace, which I don't have set up right now. But you're probably wondering, well, how do I get out of Living Hope on ProPresenter into This Is Amazing Grace down here? Well, there's MIDI cues for that as well. So let me go to this. I have MIDI clips that are pre-made for this as well. And I'm going to say, okay, when I get to the end of Living Hope, go ahead and launch song 2. So you'll see, let's just get to the end of Living Hope. I'm going to press play, and you'll see that
Tag 2, 3, 4.
actually, to make this even better, instead of jumping, I'm going to actually, when it gets to the end of the song, I'm going to add a clear command to clear the slides. So clear all the slides. And then immediately after it clears, I want it to go to This Is Amazing Grace in ProPresenter so that we can start that next song. So here we go.
Tag 2, 3, 4. End 2, 3, 4.
It cleared it. And then you saw it jump in ProPresenter to the second song in my set list, which is This Is Amazing Grace. And now down the timeline, I would do the exact same thing. Add in all the different MIDI clips for that song to correspond to ProPresenter. So it's pretty basic to set up. There's, it can get a little bit advanced. I mean, if you get this far, it's like, all right, give yourself a pat on the back because there are, some things that can go wrong. But once it's actually set up, there's rarely issues. Like once it's actually connected, there's rarely issues unless you're having network issues. And that, again, is why I would say make sure that you're on the private network that just these two computers are using, and there aren't a bunch of phones connecting to it. You really want it to be a private network so there's no interference. Now, if you're wanting to use session view in for ProPresenter cues, what I would probably do is I would use, there's a lot of different ways you can do this. Right? That's the cool thing about Ableton Live is that there's so many different ways to do the exact same thing. It's just about how you think and how you work. Probably what I would do if I were doing this is I would bring in all of my songs into arrangement view, like we just did, and I would set up my cues just like this, all my different slide cues, and I would do this down the whole timeline. Honestly, it might be easiest to just do next slide, next slide, next slide, and then just set up your ProPresenter to be in the exact order that your tracks are. That might be an easy way to do it. So I would set up all my cues just like that, and then what I would do is I would highlight all of these MIDI clips just like this, and right-click and choose Consolidate. What it's going to do is it took all those individual MIDI clips and glued them together into one MIDI clip. So now all those cues, instead of like being individual MIDI clips, it's all just in one. And now what I can do is just right-click on this MIDI clip and I'm going to name it. I'm going to call it Living Hope Lyric Cues. And then I would create a folder over here called Lyric Cues. And I can just, again, like we were saving those MIDI clips, I would save this in that folder. Or maybe you want to save them in the folder that all your tracks are for that song. That might even be better. Whatever folder you have Living Hope stems in, you could also save this MIDI clip. Then all you do is if you're in session view, you do the exact same thing, except for it's just different. Session view is more a vertical grid type setup. All you do now is you just bring in this MIDI clip we just made for Living Hope, and then I would bring in all my tracks right next to it. So let's just say I don't have Living Hope right here next to me, but I would just bring in all my tracks right there next to it. And then my lyric commands are in the first track. So it's the same principle on both, whether you're using arrangement view or session view. And you just need the IAC driver to set up the routing to send it out. It's just a lot of the little tweaks. The main thing I've seen when people say they have problems that maybe it's not sending MIDI over here, almost every time it's because they don't have the output on the actual MIDI track set to the ISE bus 1, ISE driver bus 1. I feel like that might be one of the easiest steps to forget in this whole thing. Go to Preferences, make sure track is turned on, and then make sure the output of this MIDI track is ISE driver bus 1. So that is how to sync your lyrics from Ableton Live. Sync your lyrics in ProPresenter with your tracks in Ableton Live. Pretty simple, pretty basic. It's really a fun thing to do, and it can be something that can really help just enhance your worship service, because now you never have late lyrics. You know, you don't have someone falling asleep in the back, you know, missing lyric cues. You can sync it all up. The next step to this, to take it to another level, would be to add in lighting cues using a DMX, sending cues to your DMX switcher to send lighting cues. You could have your whole service controlled by Ableton Live. And this is one way to get there. So I hope that this has been helpful. Again, thanks so much for joining us today. Thanks for being a part of the Loop community. And if you share this button, share this video, again, we're gonna choose 5 people to win 20 credits that you can use at Loop Community to purchase whatever you want. But as always, thank you for being a part of the community. We could not do this without you. And we do this to resource worship leaders and churches. And thank you for choosing to support worship leaders by buying your tracks from Loop Community. You're helping local worship leaders who are uploading their tracks. And it goes a long way. So thank you for that. And thanks for being a part. We will see you soon.